Welcome to 15241 Today Talk, subtitle Jim and Lanny Fireside Chats. Glenn Ward is our producer-director, and Linda Dunzinski is our coordinating producer. And we're going to have a fun half hour with a guy that I've gotten to know quite well over the years, John Steigerwald, former anchor at Channel 4, former anchor at Channel 2. We have a lot in common. We both teach sports announcing at Waynesburg University. We both started well back doing minor league baseball. John now has a show on The Answer at 5 o'clock every day. We'll talk about that as well. And John has a grandson, Wyatt Koval, who plays football for Upper St. Clair. But John, let's start because of we're taping this a day after the feature by Jason Mackey about Bob Prince. Tell everybody about the time you worked with Bob Prince in the 1979 World Series.
Well, I don't know how far you want me to go with this, but no, it's one of the great things for me is that I got to work my entire career, excuse me, in the town where I grew up. So I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you guys if not for Bob Prince, because it was Bob Prince as a baseball announcer that got me interested in being a baseball announcer, which I was for a few years in the minor leagues, as you said. But that's what got me into broadcasting. If not for Bob Prince, I would have never had a career in broadcasting. I wouldn't be here. And it was great because I started working at Channel 4 in December of 1978. That following January, I went to the Super Bowl with the Steelers. The following October, I'm in Baltimore working with the guy I grew up listening to, Bob Prince, riding around in a news car in the city. And as you know, you got to know him well. He was a character. And there are certain things that you can talk about Bob Prince on TV. Nothing terrible or anything like that. He was just he could be a little bit of a wild man. And so it was just great for me I would have to pinch myself as I was standing there with Bob and Bill Hillgrove. The three of us co-hosted. You were doing the play-by-play at that point. We were co-hosting a pregame show because the World Series was on ABC. And Channel 4 was an ABC affiliate. So here I am. Not only am I covering the World Series, less than a year into my TV career, I'm doing it as a co-host with Bob Prince, and so I got to see him work. I got to see how he dealt with people, and it's just a great experience. And the other thing is I got to know him pretty well from that. I mean, I knew him a little bit prior to that, but then I got to know him really well.
What led to this bathing suit episode?
Oh, yeah. So the first game, if you remember, of the World Series, Game 1, was snowed out. It snowed in Baltimore. And it was cold, and there was snow on the ground. I mean, it was cold. So now you would think Bob Prince at the time, that's 1979, he would have been about 65 years old at that time, 63, 65, something like that. He says to me and to Bill Hillgrove, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to get bathing suits. We're going to sit out by the pool, and we're going to talk about the game. We're going to act like nothing's wrong. It's a perfect day at the pool. So there's snow on the ground. And if you've never seen Bob, this is the other thing. I'm a kid who grew up. I'm 30 years old at the time. I don't think I turned 31 yet. I just turned 31. I'm still a young guy, and I'm stunned that I'm even working with Bob Prince. And now I got to look at him in a Speedo, not just a bathing suit. He was about 6'2", 112 pounds. So he comes out in his Speedo, and Bill's in his bathing suit, and I'm in mine. And we sat by the pool, and it wasn't snowing, but there was snow out on the ground. It was cold. And Bob Prince, again, he said, now listen, guys, he said, we're going to talk about the game. We'll talk about what we're expecting. We're going to do it straight. Don't mention the weather. Don't say anything about it being cold. We're just going to do it. So it's just funny that Mr. Bob Prince, who's sometimes tried to present himself as Mr. Dignified and everything serious, and so I had to get it in. So we did the whole thing, the whole routine, and we talked about the game. the series, and I can see. I'm sitting there and I'm cold, but Bob's. I mean, he's a skinny guy, and he was, in his mid-60s. He's freezing. I'm cold, but I'm going to make it. Billy Hillgrove, he's looking okay. I could see him shaking. So he says, I don't know, whatever his last line was. He said, so, what do you think? I said, well, I'll tell you one thing. I think the wind is going to be a factor. And that, of course, was his famous line. He used to say it all the time. And he just picked right up and I said, I don't think there's any question about it. The wind's going to be a factor. He goes, let's get in there. And you can see, you don't see this on TV, but on the raw video, you see him jump up out of that chair and bolt into the motel where we were staying. But what a great experience. And again, if I had grown up in Cleveland or Chicago or someplace else and hadn't been aware of and had not idolized Bob Prince, it would have been 1/10 as good. But, it's just, I'm thinking of my friends also. My friends and I we'd be up on we were like late teens, early 20s. We'd be loafing on the corner. We used to loaf on the corner of Beverly Road. We used to hang out on Isley's, and we used to hang out on that corner there. We used to call it loafing. I don't know if loafing is still a thing now. We called it loafing. But we would be standing around somebody's car listening to Bob Prince do the game. And, all my friends were Bob Prince guys. And the whole time I'm sitting there, I'm thinking about my buddies, Goose and Mike and Weezer and my friends who I hung out with. I'm sitting here next to Bob Prince, on a pregame show before the World Series. I couldn't believe I was there. It's great, though. Great experience.
Yeah, well, Bob Prince helped a lot of young broadcasters
Yeah.
along the way. Just a tremendous guy, a caring person. He gave of his time. He gave of his money. He lived in Upper St. Clair. Was proud to be a member of St. Clair Country Club. Was president of the club for a while. How about you? Did you have a chance to spend any time with the Gunner?
No, I didn't. Well, I was at that Thompson Run.
You went to that a few times.
Yeah. So I probably shook his hand.
Well, I saw him not only, but the thing is, you see, again, it's hard to put it into words what it meant for someone like me to be seeing Bob Prince, not being Bob Prince the radio announcer and just being Bob Prince the guy. I can remember going to the hotel. We stayed in a nice hotel, the Cross Keys, I think it was, down in Baltimore. Really nice place. And it was a rain out, so we had time to kill, and we're having some kind of a meeting. There are probably, production meeting or something. There are probably 10 people in the room. And I'm an inexperienced guy. I'm not, traveling on a major league level and all that stuff. And Prince comes into the room. Now, all these people are in there. He picks up the menu. He doesn't ask anybody anything. He doesn't come to me and say, we're going to get something to eat. What would you like, Jim? He picks up the menu, and it's room service, and he just starts reading. He said, all right, give me 4 of those club sandwiches. Let's have. He didn't ask anybody what they wanted, and he just ordered a bunch of food to come in. And that I don't know. That was a dumb little thing, but it impressed me.
Well, and I'm sure you found this to be the case, and I'm sure you do as well, Jim. There are people in this world that when it comes to dinner, they don't ever pick up a check.
Oh, right.
But the Gunner was the opposite way. It was like he always picked up checks, and he was proud to be the guy that was leading the way in that.
Right,
regard.
and when he died, I do remember one of his friends was quoted as saying, "I don't know how much money Bob made in his life, but I can guarantee you he spent at least $1,000 more than that." So he liked to. Bob liked to have fun. He's great.
Right, let me switch now.
Okay.
I mentioned that your grandson playing football.
Yeah.
So you have how many grandchildren in Upper St. Clair?
I have 4 in Upper St. Clair, 2 in Mount Lebanon. He's the youngest. He'll turn 17 next month, and he's 6'3". Now about 6'2" right now. I'm thinking by next September he might be 6'3". He's growing. 250, 255, 260, big.
Because of
Offensive
COVID,
lineman.
did you get a chance to see the games?
I did a couple games. I got into when they were letting people in. I think I only saw like 2 games, but he played some JV this year because he was a junior. I got to see him play in the JV games. But he got some good varsity time. I'm guessing he's going to be a starter next year. So he's a big kid. I mean, he was little Wyatt, and now he's 6'2", 255.
Before we get off this subject, I just got to ask it.
Yeah.
How long was that segment
Which one?
in the swimming suits?
It was long enough that he was blue. I mean, I'm not kidding you. It was probably 15 minutes, but it was his idea. That's the best part about it. I tell you what we're gonna do, right? And I don't know where we got bathing suits. Who would have brought bathing suits to
Baltimore in
in
October.
the middle of October?
Yeah.
I don't know how we got them, but he figured it out. Yeah.
John, what was it at what point in your life that you wanted to be a sportscaster?
Well, I'm a lot like you. I know you and I have talked about it. I used to love playing pickup games and doing all that stuff. And I was always one of the smallest kids, so I was a pretty decent athlete, but I wasn't going to play. I wasn't going anywhere athletically. And so I loved sports, and I loved going to baseball games mostly, and I loved listening to Bob Prince. So I was probably 12, 13 years old when I started thinking about it. And I don't know about you, but what happens when you want to get into a field like that, a lot of times people say, come on, that's a really competitive field. You don't want to get in that. It's really hard to make it. And I was kind of talked out of it, and I was in college majoring in history, thinking I was going to be a history teacher, and finally there was something. I went to the school, Walsh College. It's now Walsh University in Canton, and for some reason there was something going on, and it was a real small school. I did a Howard Cosell impersonation, and they wanted me to do it on. I did it on tape, and they put it in the student union, and they ran me being Howard Cosell. I don't remember what the reason was for it, but there was something about that I said, what am I kidding myself for? This is what I want to do. So then I went on to Kent State, majored in telecommunications, and pursued it the same way you did, when small stations, no money, riding the buses in the minor leagues. But I knew at a young age that that's what I wanted to do. I let people talk me out of it for the first few years, and then until I said, come on, this is what I'm made to do. I don't know if I was made to do it, but this is what I want to do. This is what I like doing. And for me, I wanted to do play-by-play because to me, I didn't care about being famous. I didn't care about actually being on radio, which is what I was pursuing early on. I thought it was an unbelievable concept to get up in the morning and know that you're going to go to a game to do what you would do anyway, go watch a baseball game, and somebody's going to pay you for it. No more complicated than that. So I was always all about the games. Just what time's the game start,
You have a good Chuck Noll story.
A great Chuck Noll story. I started it on radio. I followed Lanny into Charleston in 1976. I did the games there, and then the team moved to Columbus. So I ended up at KQV. Got a job doing radio sports, sportscasts, and so it's 1977. I had my first day on the job there was to report to training camp in August. This is the Steelers. They're pretty good at the time. And Chuck Noll I was a little bit intimidated by him. So that's my first few weeks on the job. They had the press conference, the Chuck Noll press conference, every Monday in those days. And they had it in the press lounge at Three Rivers Stadium, which was behind the press box. And they would it would be Chuck Noll sitting at a table, a few writers sitting around him, and they'd let fans in. They were eating their lunch, and they would listen to what Chuck would say about the previous game. Well, then the electronic guys, the radio and TV guys, got to do one-on-ones with him when he was finished with that. So, after the whole thing's over, I'm kind of nervous. I had never met Chuck Noll, and he has no idea who I am. And I see all these other people from Pittsburgh media who are well-known, and I'm a nobody. So I'm waiting in my spot by your radio booth, Lanny. I was going to do the interview there, and he's over interviewing somebody else. He comes over to me. He stands in front of me, and I say, Chuck, John Steigerwald, I'm with KQV Radio. He goes like this. what? And I'm thinking, I've only been on the air for a month. I couldn't possibly have said something already, to make Chuck Noll mad. He said, what'd you say your name was? I said, John Steigerwald. He said, Steigerwald was my mother's maiden name. Now, that's not a common name. Now, he said that to me, and this is my first conversation with Chuck Noll. He tells me that we're distantly related, maybe, So that's my. I mean, I could tell you, I could go on all day.
Sure.
And you, as a coach, Jim, my favorite line that I'll get your reaction to this, because you're not supposed to think this way, but it was after a game. Excuse me. It was after a game in. They had played the Jets, I think it was, and it was a Monday press conference after the game. And at that time, again, all it was a long table, maybe 10 or 12 guys sitting at the table, and he was at the end, head of the table. And Phil Music, who was a great sports writer, he says to Chuck, Chuck, the Steelers blew the Jets out. And he says, Chuck, he said, I was talking to some of the Jets coaches, and they thought you were kind of, because he had a philosophy of leaving Bradshaw in the game. He left the quarterback in. He thought it was unfair to put a guy in cold, more chance of him getting hurt, and he didn't like the message it sent to his team that okay, the game's over, so because our quarterback's coming out. So he was different about that. But some teams looked at it differently. So anyway, Phil Music says, Chuck, I was talking, and he says it with a real serious tone, like, Chuck, I was talking to the coaches and even the head coach. They seem to think that you were rubbing it in a little bit there at the end to get Bradshaw in. This is what Noll did. He looked at him. I can remember Phil Music was sitting right there, and Chuck was here at the end of the table. He went, I didn't see any white flags. Pretty good answer?
Yeah,
you like that answer?
Very good.
Yeah, that's Chuck Noll. To me, that he just didn't have any time for the BS.
Yeah.
I'm out there. Don't bother me with that. So I don't care I don't care if they're upset. But he called me cuz a couple of times. But let me tell you something. That was 1977, I guess, and he was around till 92, 15 more years. It wasn't like he all of a sudden was much more accommodating to me, or patted me on the head and asked me how I was doing. He was nice enough to me, but it didn't help me that much.
I had a couple experiences with him, and he would fool you. And what I mean by that is, I was in the locker room. George Perlis had taken me into the locker room and before a nationally televised game with Houston and Bum Phillips.
Yeah.
And I thought, I got to get out of here, because when he comes in, he's going to want to know.
Yeah, who are you? Yeah.
Who am I?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't make it, and he came. Well, my point is, he sat down and we talked about all sorts of things. He was very cerebral.
Oh, yeah.
He could talk on me. But he was very, this was an hour and a half before this huge game. Then on the other hand, I might see him down there in the spring when you'd think he's not busy or whatever.
Yeah.
And he would barely have anything to say.
Yeah.
And he'd be on his way.
Focused, yeah.
Good guy, but a little complicated.
And lived in Upper St. Clair the entire time he was here. And I think most people in Upper St. Clair know the house that he lived in. But I always found it interesting. He was here for almost 30 years, and I never saw him anywhere, other than at a Steeler game or in a media Chuck Noll relationship situation. I never saw him anywhere. You would think I would have run into him at the Village or been next to him in a car, looked over. I never saw him, and he lived in that house. And the great thing about him was, he was Chuck Noll, and don't have to bore people with what he did. Everybody knows what he did, but he couldn't care less about the celebrity part of it. He didn't want any parts of it. He wasn't nasty about it or anything. I think he was nice to people when they approached him, but he had no interest whatsoever in any of that stuff. Of being, hey, I'm Chuck Noll. None.
I got to tell you this real quick. Same experience,
Yeah.
You'd think you'd see Chuck around.
Yeah.
But we never did. Well, a friend of mine from Youngstown, Ohio, was visiting, and I'm driving around Upper St. Clair showing him different
Yeah.
things. So we're coming up Chuck Street, and I said, Chuck Knoll lives right down the street.
Yeah.
Well, as we drove by, Chuck was outside pruning the roses.
No kidding.
And this guy, I mean, he just couldn't
Yeah.
get over the fact
Yeah.
that here we are, and there's Chuck.
Yeah, and you think everybody would think Chuck Knoll would be in there looking at film. You know what I mean? Like he's not. What's he doing out? Shouldn't he be in there looking at film?
I think he took a lot of pride in the roses.
He did, yeah, yeah, and being a pilot, and he was a different guy, but nobody in my career intimidated me more than he did. I was, and I don't mean intimidated like I was terrified or he was mean or anything like that. It's just that I respected that guy so much, and I respected the way that he handled himself, not just his accomplishments, but the way that he was despite all those accomplishments. And I just loved his refusal to put up with the usual BS that comes with being a coach and having to be phony. And, I'm talking about more of an NFL coach where you got a meeting with media all the time, And the way he handled himself was, what a guy.
Yep.
John, you've got a reputation as being a pretty opinionated individual on the air, and we've talked about this before. But how was it that you came to believe that was going to be part of your persona?
Well, the house I grew up in, my dad was never shy about expressing opinions, and I just thought that's what you did. I mean, he didn't say, "Hey, let me tell you what I think about that." He would just blurt out an opinion. And I picked up a lot of that from him, and that's just the household I grew up in. But I also, Dick Stockton. Do you remember? You know who Dick Stockton is? Sure. Dick Stockton was the sportscaster on KDKA when I had just about convinced myself that this is what I'm going to do. Maybe late high school and getting ready to go into college. I was trying to convince myself that I wanted to do this. Well, Dick Stockton was on KDKA. He was probably 23 years old at the time. And he would do his sportscast, but at the end of his sportscast, he did a commentary. And it said, below him on the lower third of the screen, it said, commentary. Well, so I started watching that, and I thought, I kind of like that, that he does the sports, and then he gives his opinion on what's happening. And he ended up becoming a pretty big deal, And so that I picked it up from that, but then that was also at the time when Howard Cosell was becoming a big deal, late 60s, before Monday Night Football, and he became Howard Cosell because of his opinions. So I thought that's the way I'm going to go, and it's funny because I wanted to be a baseball announcer, so those two things didn't mix all that well, but I can remember my first job up in Sharon, PA. I was working for a cable TV station doing high school football and basketball. I would throw opinions in about I thought it was a bad call, and I wouldn't be shy about it. And it was working for me, so I kept doing it. And it in some ways it made things more difficult because if you state an opinion, especially one that's on a controversial subject, half the people that hear it are going to disagree with you, and probably half of the people who disagree with you are going to not like you anymore because you said it, and if it's a strong enough opinion on an important subject. So, but when I got to KDKA, well, and it also worked for me. I left Channel 4 because we had a contract issue, and KDK offered me a much better deal, but I had a no-compete clause, so I had to sit out for a year, and so I couldn't be on the air. But because I had been doing commentaries on the O'Brien and Gary radio show, and because I was obviously on TV, I was willing to give opinions. Post-Gazette called me and asked me when I was out, couldn't be on TV, and they called me and asked me if I wanted to write a column. Well, you can't write a column without opinions. So if I hadn't established a reputation of that, of being willing to express an opinion, I would have never gotten that. And so I did that for 30 years, off and on, different papers. So I had a column. So it worked. So that's why I kept doing it. Some people don't. I mean, some people, Billy Hillgrove I worked with, he would be very reluctant to express an opinion. Pretty sure he's still working. He's still out there. So, you can do it both ways.
Go ahead.
So this opinion reputation that you have, what about the challenges of then going into locker rooms and meeting up with players?
Yeah, I managed that pretty well. That's the thing. See, if you're going to do a talk show like a Mark Madden show, he can't go in the Steelers locker room after the things that he says. He can't do it. He can't go in the Pirates locker room. Now he has a relationship with the Penguins that he's able to. He's kind of a fan of the Penguins and they like him. But give him credit. He's not shy about ripping Penguins either if he thinks they deserve it. And he'll go in the locker room. But it's a tough thing to navigate when you do what I did for a living, which is anchor the sports every night and make a statement and then criticize a player and then have to show up in the locker room the next day and he sees you. See, they don't have that problem now because nobody watches it. The players don't watch. No, seriously, they don't. When I was doing it, there was no ESPN, and when there was ESPN, there's still local news was still a much bigger deal. So if you were the sports anchor on KDKA, all the players knew who you were, and they watched you because that's where they got their sports. Now they don't. You think Juju Smith-Schuster's watching Channel 4 at night? He's not watching that. It's not happening. So it was difficult to navigate. And one story, Jim Leland stopped talking to me because for a year he didn't talk to me because there was a guy, I've talked to you about this before, a shortstop. You criticized him, Ray
Quinones.
Yeah, it became pretty obvious that he wasn't a big fan of running out ground balls, and so I ripped him on the air, and fans were booing him, and what I said was. I don't believe booing helps ever. If a guy strikes out and you boo him, I think that's dumb. But if you think a guy's not working hard and you think he's loafing, running down to first base, boo him all day. Boo him like crazy. Boo him out of the stadium. And this guy deserves to be booed. Well, Jim, I'm guessing, heard it secondhand. That's usually the way it works. Somebody told him, hey, Steigerwald was telling everybody to boot. He said, tell him I'm not talking to him anymore. Well, a year later, in the meantime, they got rid of the guy, right? And you were criticizing him I've heard you criticize him on the air. And a year later, I'm at spring training, and I want to do an interview with the manager, but he doesn't talk to me, so I'm just kind of hanging around while other people interview him. So he sent somebody out and told me to come in. He said, hey, I apologize. I think we had a misunderstanding. Don't worry about it. Him. And then he was great after that. But so that's expressing an opinion, and now I can't interview the manager of the Pirates because he may have felt 100% justified. And I'm sure there were times, believe me, when my opinion was BS and that I deserved to have somebody be mad at me because I didn't know what it was. I'm a little weasel running around with a microphone. I'm going up to Joe Green and telling him how he should, that I criticizing him or criticizing a coach like Jim or a pro coach.
Hey, John, we just got a couple minutes left. Tell everybody about your show. 5 o'clock, right? Every day on The Answer?
5 till 6 on AM 1250, The Answer. Lots of opinions. It's not a sports show, but it's not a sports show either. I talk a lot about sports. It's more of a political, cultural type show where I'm talking about things, a conservative talk show. And I will talk about sports, but I'm more likely to talk about Colin Kaepernick kneeling for the national anthem, or transgender women competing against women and girls in sports. I like those subjects because they're still sports, and I can talk about that. But I like to say that it shows about everything and anything. And
you get a lot of guests on your show.
Yeah,
correct?
my main thing is guests. I don't take calls. I try to get 2 guests for every show. I even had Mike Pence on during the campaign, and so that was almost as impressive to me as interviewing Chuck Noll, the Vice President of the United States. But no, I enjoy doing it. I'm doing it from home now because of COVID. I haven't been into the studio since April, and so my little office upstairs. I go in for an hour every night. I sit down. I spew my opinions. I talk to people who are a lot smarter than I am, which isn't hard to find. And the way I look at it is, there's certain subjects I like, but I don't consider myself an expert on these things. So I find experts or people who claim to be experts, and I do a good job of preparing for the interview. I don't just throw them in there and just start babbling. I've got questions written out, and I research who they are, what they've said, and I kind of like doing it. I like doing it a lot.
Yeah, you're doing a great job with it, and we're together at Waynesburg, and John Steigerwald. Our paths have crossed a lot over the years, and just within the last 10, 12 years, we've become great friends. John, thanks very much for joining
Thanks for
Jim
having
and me. John Steigerwald joining us on 15241 Today Talk, and thank you folks for watching.